Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. And we're zooming in and focusing in a little bit more in depth on some of the difficulty that presents in maintaining long-term relationships with covert narcissists. And before we get started, I want to give a huge shout out to the Empowered Harmonizers. Much love coming to you. Thank you so much for your viewership. Let's do this. Let's get to the bottom of this. Let's heal you once and for all and for good, and keep making sure that we're tweaking your resolve, your commitment, and your razor sharp focus to getting your needs met, to getting your voice heard, to getting your life lived on your terms, the way that you need it, the way that perhaps you have been living in a denied space from. So let's get you back to your personal power. And I want to zoom in and focus in on really a key important aspect when it comes to understanding in depth the covert narcissist. And there's a lot of information in the research that suggests that the covert narcissist has a disordered internal representation of themselves and others. And it's always represented by a self-bias. In other words, they want everything is always in a bias of themselves. I think that's a very interesting way to look at it, that everything is always biased towards them. So, it sort of shuts down the information. It sort of clogs the filter that reality is trying to give you when people are like, hey, you're doing a good job, or hey, this hurts, or hey, this isn't right, hey, we need to work on this here. Normal information that they just sort of black out through a very avoidant attachment style, or dismissive, meaning that there's always a referential self-bias. So this is kind of in-depth psychology talk, so excellent for you for hanging in there. But when we talk about a self-bias, it means really having that. It's having a prejudice towards oneself for the covert narcissist in the air of superiority, grandiosity, entitlement, lack of empathy, and exploitation. In other words, they have all the reasons in the world to do this, and oftentimes they don't feel like they're wrong. So that can be part of the problem. And if they're resistant to change, it's because if they don't see any reason to change or any benefit to changing, then they will not. They'll hold dear to what is known in their research as kind of like the metaphysical or metaphorical ivory tower. So they'll just kind of sit up there in their self-bias and not really sort of open up to the winds of change. They're trying to like rattle their windows. They just, they just bolt it down even harder, and then they just keep going and staying in their ivory tower. And it's very interesting because we have a lot of viewers who have been with these relationships for decades and have wondered what's going on for decades, and no one has been able to help articulate. So it's very important, and I thank you for sharing your stories, and you're always welcome to here in this community. And another thing that's important about this is what is felt in the literature is the covert narcissist has unrelenting standards for maintaining a sense of self-worth and personal goals that are valuable enough for them to be pursued. So it's like it's good to have focus, but they have an unrelenting standard to maintaining this, meaning despite evidence to the contrary, they're going to keep doing A, B, C, X, Y, Z. Even though there's data to suggest, hey, honey, we can't do that. Hey, sugar, we need to do this, or I need that, or we need to travel, or we need to make some changes, or whatever it is that you're looking for to spice up your relationship or your life, or just have open and expressive communication. I think that's one of the impairments, is that a lot of people in relationships, they can't have expressive emotional relationships. They can't just be themselves. They can't love the people who they want to love because they're not open to receiving, the free flow of interchange of communication and conversation. They're just oftentimes shut away, where they're just, they won't really acknowledge others because of this self-bias. And it's very hurtful to not be acknowledged when you're excited about something, or something's important, or you've just made this breakthrough, or anything that is of importance to you. I mean, it can be as little as a great meal, or look at this, or look at that, and they just won't acknowledge you. I mean, that really hurts like a knife to the gut. And we know that this is abusive. It is emotional abuse, oftentimes, especially chronically and pervasively, to be treated with disrespect, disregard, and ignoring. And like my dentist once said, ignore your teeth and they'll go away. I mean, you know, he had a poster of that in his dental office, and he also had a poster, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And so he would have that while you're like laying back getting your teeth done, he'd have that on the ceiling. And I always remember that. And so, you know, this really does play a role with the covert narcissist. And the other part that they, you know, talk about the unrelenting standards, and as results, the narcissists seem to include this perfectionism or this rigorous retreat, or I would call it like a rigorous sort of retreating or retiring away from others, withdrawing. It tends to be very, very, very stringent, meaning very strict, very adhered to. I mean, rigid, just, it just won't change. And this, you know, this perfectionism towards maintaining their self-bias can be very rigid and so stringent. And also that the target is generally raised over time, or, you know, their standard is raised even higher and higher and higher. In other words, it's worse and worse and worse for oftentimes a lot of people who are with them, because they feel they're so resistant to change. They're not open. They're not contributing to the relationship. There's not you can't get them to say anything. It's like, at first the strong and silent was good. You know, over time, you feel unacknowledged and ignored, and it's not a good way for you to express. So that's why I talk in the recovery journal how important it is for you to go on your recovery date and define those areas of expressivity for you, because that's what bottled up emotion needs, is to be expressed. It needs to be walked, it needs to be cooked, it needs to be drawn, it needs to be fished, it needs to be built. I mean, it needs to be said, it needs to get out. And so, you know, you don't want to bring, though, a lot of baggage to people who don't have empathy for you. They're like, yeah, you know, your life has been miserable for 25 years. That's why you do need a support group. You need a variety of different outlets. And one of them, namely, if you've been kind of a victim of this, is to have a support group. And even, you know, mentoring by committee or support group by committee, even if it's in books, videos, podcasts, spiritual groups. I mean, getting togethers which are strictly for that purpose. The Al-Anons, the Codependent Anonymous. You can research CODA, C-O-D-A. You can research these places. I mean, they have get-togethers. They have places where you can go strictly for the spiritual help. And that's a lot of what I'm working on in the book, as well as the website that I have forthcoming, is to have a support network for people to connect and have a moderator such as myself to provide, content and feedback and things of that nature. I try to keep it very streamlined here on YouTube, but on the the website that's forthcoming, I think we're going to do more of a community support with a moderator, and we might get some guest moderators in there as well. Some viewers who I think have learned quite a bit would serve as great moderators on the website as well. So that is forthcoming. But look, always realize that this, though, with the covert narcissist, that their perfectionist standards can also be set for others, which leads to, them oftentimes being derogatory to others for not kind of like living up to, you'll find, we broke up, it was a disappointment to me, you disappointed me. Well, I am me, this, or they might, make these derogatory comments, you're not living an inspired life, or you're not good enough here or there. I mean, when you are, but it's just they have these standards which are so unrealistic. The grandiosity leads to these unrealistic expectations of what they're going to get out of a relationship. They end up alienating the perfect people or good people because their standards are so rigorous, relentless, and they hold these for others that no one can really meet up to. So it can be very, very hurtful to find yourself kind of in the stream of this early derogatory treatment because you're not meeting up to their standards. I mean, why can't you just, that's why I talk about how important it is when you talk about moving on into other relationships, that you don't, select or find, that one of the qualifications of people is that they're not judgmental. They're not trying to, you don't have to live up to their standards. You can just be yourself. Yes, there are people out there who will happy for you to be as is, as are, as yourself is. I mean, just period. They're not trying to change you, control you, have you, meet up to their standards. You are enough. You are okay. You are lovable just the way that you are. You don't need to move a thing, change a thing. I mean, so, the hands of change in your life are your hands. You're the one, change works through you, not from another trying to beat it into you. Do that, if it comes from outside of you, then eventually when that person is gone, you'll be like a noodle, you can't really stand up. So we always talk about how important the internal locus of control is when it comes to living your life. You don't have to have, and that is part of the crushing egoism. Like Dr. Craig Malkin says, people who eventually become like echoes, their life becomes echoes of the needs of another. They're just like this is my needs, here I am. They're just like carbon copies. They just echo out what people need. And he named this after the nymph Echo, who is, I think it's in Greek mythology, who basically at the end of their admonishment or their punishment was, and a lot of people say their relationship is like a punishment, but their punishment was that they could only repeat the last few words that someone else said, that they could never ever have their own voice. The nymph Echo could only speak the last few words that another spoke. I think it was who Narcissist spoke, or I'm not sure who. I don't know the full details of that Greek mythology. But in other words, their words, their voice cannot come from within. And so that is the basic, that is the ultimate, crime of life, is that you can't live your own life. You're trying to live for another as an echoist, as Dr. Craig Malkin says. So some people would say it's like codependency, and I've talked about it before, and where your blueprint for your life is only mapped out to fulfill another's needs, or that's where you found yourself now. And if it is, that's okay. But that's why we need to get pen to paper, pen in hand, engage in the positive, orderly direction thinking, so you're not, you're out of that role. You're out of that echoist place in your life where you're not just living to echo another needs. And a lot of people are raised feeling that is the right way to live, or the only way to live. And, when you begin to challenge these early blueprints that were set up in your life between ages of 0 and 5, what you experience between those years are what you believe to be true. So anything, if you were, are raised by a narcissist, a borderline, or a psychopath in those first 5 years, your blueprint was hardwired. It was set. And so if you were treated as a lost child or a golden child, or, you were scapegoated, every other relationship is going to be like a blueprint, or like almost like a widget. If you were to look at like a design for something and it were to produce something, you'll find that the pattern tends to repeat itself later into life. So here's 0 to 5, and you got, 7 to 10, 12 to 15, 15 to 20, you'll see that there's a similar pattern. So that's why we have to break that cycle. Especially if you're used to, that lost child syndrome, feeling unacknowledged, feeling unvalidated, feeling like, you can't really think or orchestrate. You don't have that emotional muscle strong. You're used to being invalidated and that being your truth. And it's very hard because to go up against that truth is really, most people will be resistant. Nope, that's not me. Nope, that hurts. Ow, that hurts. I can't do that. So you'll find yourself very resistant to changing how you feel about trust of yourself, trust of others, your comfort level. It's going to take some work. It's going to take swallowing a couple big pills. You might need to crunch it down into smaller pills, basically, in order to stomach it. But knowing that eventually that, as I call it, like an external yardstick. If you could hold up a yardstick, stop looking at your life as a reflection of only fulfilling those needs, even if that was your truth. So you need to challenge your own truth. So that's part of the healing journey, is knowing that in those first 5 years, that's where your truth was laid out. But your truth might not be your personal truth. Do you see how your life then would have to contradict what happened in those first 5 years? Your life now would have to be now in your hands to recreate your personal truth. It's a big job, and it becomes really, it might take a while to kind of get it in there in your solar plexus, in your body, where you really get that. And it might be very sad. It might be very hurtful to hear these things or to feel these things and saying, I've got to take my truth into my hands and get away from, these very controlling, domineering strategies. Or maybe I was, told to live a lie, or I have to challenge that now. And you can begin with humility and humbleness and say, wow, I have the honor and privilege of redirecting my life now. It's an honor and a privilege. So when you look at it with that gratitude, that is one of the most powerful emotions you can experience. That then tips onto the the awesome and the sublime, which is really that inspiration power. When you really enter into that emotional field, that is where change is made. So when if you try to make change just logically, oftentimes that's why you will become very resistant. It has to be not always a linear change. It can be kind of a global change where all of a sudden things start making sense. But when you enter into those stronger, more poignant, more powerful or profound emotions, you need to get there in order to get into change. The change, you can't just change intellectually or through logic. It's not going to work that way. You're going to have to find that it's just going to have to move. And that's from that subconscious work. After you do it, then the subconscious will begin to move you in the right direction, and then things will begin to make sense. It might take, how long will it take? It might take a month, 6 months, a year, 2 years. It might take 3 years. It might take some time, but it is a process that you can be aware. The deeper the cut, the longer it's going to take to heal. You got a little superficial wound, it's going to heal quickly. The deeper the wound, we're looking at 6 weeks. We're looking at 8 weeks. I mean, look at me in the cervical collar. This thing isn't healing in 2 weeks. This is going to take me 6 to 8 weeks. This is going to take 12 weeks. This is going to take 6 months maybe before I'm fully where but it is what it is. I'm not living in denial. I have to get this healing work done, and I'm not procrastinating. Hey, I've got to do this. Hey, let's get this done. So if you're, finding, then, rigorously judged or held up by those yardsticks, get rid of those yardsticks. Get rid of that old truth, that erroneous truth. I think erroneous, in error truth, maybe that you were told earlier in the relationship or earlier in your life where you went for the love bombing and you're like, this relationship doesn't fit me now. This old truth does not fit me now. Do not be afraid to grow out of it, and realize that oftentimes those maladaptive strategies, or working with that covert, with this self-bias, and you're so used to that, you might need to challenge yourself and really have some independent time, some solitary time, breaking away, getting an appointment book and scheduling this time in. It will force you to do it. You need to, let your hand do the walking, let your fingers do the walking, and then eventually move you into action. Even if it's scary, even if it feels stupid, you are feeling the right things. You're making the physical changes. And when you do that, everything will begin to follow. But you need to get that physical self moving in that right direction to get away from that sort of empty feeling. Oftentimes it comes as a result of these emotionally manipulative relationships with a covert narcissist or a psychopath. It is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. I hope that these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.